tore my children from my arms, and the asphalt felt colder than the night itself. Please, they're my babies, don't take them!
You're powerless, Sarah. Accept it.
Mark Warren, step out of the vehicle and get on your knees before I make you.
You don't deserve to be a mother. I'll take the children away and you'll never see them again. The ex-husband yelled, snatching the two screaming children from my niece's arms and roughly throwing them into the back seat of the car. My niece, Sarah, collapsed on the rain-soaked asphalt, dragging herself along the car in despair. "Please, Mark, don't take them away. They're my children." But Mark just sneered, slammed the car door shut. He rolled down the window and said in an arrogant challenge, "Don't bother calling the police. My lawyer has already paid for everything. You're just a weak woman with no money or power. Accept your fate." He thought he had won. He thought Sarah had no one to back her up. But he had made a fatal mistake. What he didn't know was that the panicked call Sarah had just made wasn't to 911, but to my private hotline. Mark was about to step on the gas when, bam! A jet-black armoured car came barreling toward him. Overhead, the roar of helicopters tore through the night sky. Dozens of red lasers from snipers were aimed straight at his forehead through the windshield. I stepped out of the command vehicle, megaphone in hand, the steely voice of an FBI director. "Mark, get out of the car and get on your knees. Now." I'm guessing 99% of you will hear this, sigh and scroll past, not clicking like or subscribe, even if it only takes a second. What time is it in your country, and where are you listening to this story? The recovery room at St. Jude's Medical Center in Seattle was cold and quiet, save for a pale neon light on the walls. It was a false silence. Emily Vance's body was heavy, having just undergone an emergency cesarean section. The anesthesia still lingered, plunging her into a state of half-consciousness, where she couldn't be sure what was real and what was a nightmare. She tried to open her eyes. She saw a figure. The person was wearing a dark blue janitor's uniform, a cap and mask covering their face. They moved too carefully, too quietly for a night shift worker. Emily wanted to scream, to ask, but her body betrayed her. She tried to move her fingers, but they felt like stone. As soon as the person approached the glass crib beside the bed, the security camera light on the ceiling flickered and went dark. The entire NICU security camera system was disabled. 10 minutes. 10 minutes of perfect darkness. Emily barely caught sight of the eyes. Dark, piercing eyes, staring straight at her, as if looking at someone invisible, before the person bent down and picked up the baby. Her heart clenched. A cold shock shot through her, clearing away the lingering effects of the anesthesia. She recognized those eyes. Sienna Blake. Sienna placed her baby in an industrial cart, not a hospital crib. She closed the lid, gently but firmly. Emily struggled, mustering all her remaining strength to reach for the nurse call button. Finally, she reached it. The alarm had just sounded when Adam Warren, her husband, burst into the room. His face was contorted with shock, but it was too perfect. Emily screamed, pointing at the empty crib. "Adam, Sienna, she took our baby!" Adam didn't look at the crib, he just looked at Emily. His panic was too perfect, too controlled. Immediately after, Adam Warren took the hospital tablet, coldly denying the existence of the baby, reassuring her with the softest voice, but full of denial. He was using the medical records against her. Adam Warren hurriedly covered up the truth, but his deceitful eyes, avoiding the empty crib, were undeniable living proof. The alarm had died down, but the chaos in the recovery room was even more intense. Adam Warren was no longer the panicking husband. He had become a cold part of the system. Nurses, doctors, and Adam, all of them looked at Emily with the same suspicious eyes. The eyes of someone looking at a mental patient. Adam held the hospital iPad, the screen glowing a cold blue. He didn't need to raise his voice. It was his angry but controlled voice that hurt Emily. "Emily, you're affected. You're suffering from postpartum stress. The hospital logs don't have a baby with our name on it. You never gave birth, Emily. His words were like knives cutting into the truth she was trying to cling to. She felt her child for 9 months. She saw him born, but in front of these people, her memories were rubbish. The feeling of being gaslighted was more intense than the pain of the incision. She wanted to scream that she wasn't crazy, but she knew her words didn't matter. She clung to the last thread, her iPhone lying on the table next to the empty crib. She remembered taking a quick photo, the only evidence. She used all her strength to reach for it, unlock the screen. The phone screen showed the photo album. The blurry photo of the baby bracelet appeared, just for a moment, then disappeared. The message, "This photo is no longer available," appeared, cold and cruel. It felt like someone invisible had just broken into her mind, snatched away the last evidence. Emily had no doubt. This wasn't a medical accident. It wasn't a hallucination. This was deliberate manipulation. They had locked the door. Now they were erasing the traces, turning her into a madwoman. Emily was completely out of the game, but a spark of anger and determination was starting to burn inside her. She wouldn't let them erase her child. The recovery room had become an invisible prison. Emily had stopped crying. Her tears had dried, leaving only emptiness and a bone-chilling fear. Adam kept insisting on postpartum depression, a cruel medical term used as a weapon. The doctor then suggested she sign a consent form for psychological counseling, even compulsory hospitalization. This was not help. This was a deliberate legal attack. Loss of her child, loss of evidence, and now loss of dignity. Emily understood that if she were to be declared mentally unstable, she would lose all control over her life, and most importantly, over the truth about her child. They would take away her right to be a mother by taking away her sanity. She looked at the consent for psychological evaluation form on the bedside table. The light from the hospital window shone in, highlighting a line of small, almost invisible letters. Meanwhile, in the NICU hallway, a person in a white blouse, not a familiar doctor or nurse, quietly pulled all of Emily's paper files off the shelf. Her files were placed in a separate folder labeled Private and Restricted. Emily read the small print. Allows the hospital to restrict access to your medical records if necessary. She felt like a trap had been set. They didn't just want to keep her in her room, they wanted to keep her trapped in her own madness. The evidence had been erased. The files had been sealed. Emily had been taken out of the game. Only Adam and the hospital system were left as the rational ones. She was completely isolated, pushed to the brink where she had to fight not only to find her baby, but to assert her own sanity. Just when the door of hope seemed to be closing completely in front of Emily, it was opened by a man. Walter Hayes. Emily's uncle, a retired veteran FBI agent. He had come from Seattle, not to comfort her with words, but to seek the truth. Walter Hayes did not believe in postpartum depression or system glitches. He hated nonsense. His eyes, though no longer wearing a badge, were still those of a seasoned investigator who had spent his life reading lies. He asked to see the technical logs. A major security system in America would never have a 10-minute random failure, Walter said in a calm, decisive voice, standing at the counter. Especially at a high-end private hospital like St. Jude's. This was not an accident. This was an operation. Walter did not care about emotions. He only sought the truth hidden behind the numbers. He scanned the old security screens in the guard room. The main screen still displayed the dreaded "no signal." But then he stopped. In a corner, hidden behind a stack of papers, he saw it. A small screen, an obscure internal camera. It was still active. It still showed a blurry image of the hallway, with a signal when all the other cameras were silent. A guard came in immediately, his face tense. He quickly covered the screen, his voice full of concern. "That camera is not part of the main system, sir. You don't need to worry about it." Walter nodded, but he had seen enough. He had seen where the enemy had gone wrong. The last thread wasn't Emily's fragile memory, but a flaw in the enemy's perfect plan. Walter Hayes knew the child was still missing, but now they had a logical starting point. Emily was no longer in the recovery room. She was dressed, her incision still aching, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional pain. She and Walter Hayes, her uncle, sat in a small guest room at St. Jude's, spreading out a map of the security camera system. Emily had to suppress her pain. Walter had to suppress his anger at Adam's blatant manipulation. They worked together, looking for blind spots, loopholes that Adam and his men had missed. "They came through here," Emily said, her voice alert and sharp. "Definitely not the normal route. If you can't see them on the main camera, they must have taken another route." Walter nodded, his face hard. He circled an area not entirely covered by cameras. The loading dock, the area where packages and garbage trucks are received. The emergency truck exit, the least likely place to be seen at 3 a.m. Just as hope flickered, the feeling of being watched came back, cold as the air conditioning. Emily's iPhone vibrated. Emily was no longer panicking, she just felt a chill of fear. She opened the anonymous text message she had just sent. It was not a vague threat. "Stop looking at the map. People already believe you're insane." Walter stood up immediately. "We're being watched," he said, his voice on high alert. Immediately, the security camera screen at the nearby fire exit, which had been just a static angle, suddenly zoomed in on their faces. The enemy knew exactly where they were. The enemy was controlling every move. But the evidence of the truck, of the loading dock, had been opened. Emily knew she might be considered crazy, but the truth still existed and no one could close it anymore. Walter Hayes knew the danger. He knew Adam Warren had been alerted, and the hospital's security system was watching them. They had to act faster, clinging to the back camera clues. Walter sought out a young IT technician at St. Jude's, a man who was willing to risk his life for justice. They worked in a small, cold server room, lit only by the blue glow of computer screens. They didn't find the baby, but they did find evidence of the stolen dumpster on a forgotten internal camera. The black and white footage, hazy but indisputable, showed a large industrial cart leaving the hospital's loading dock. Soon after, the public transportation logs were pulled up. Walter Hayes held the Uber Lyft printout in his hand. The ride was at 3:17 a.m. It was definitely not an Uber or Lyft, but an account registered under Adam's company name, with a destination of A-frame cabin, Olympic Peninsula, the very place Adam had taken her child to hide. The IT allies looked at Walter, pale and sweaty. He knew he had just stolen evidence that could cost him his career. As soon as the allies copied the footage file to the USB, the computer screen flashed a bright red message. "Unauthorized access detected, file wiped, shutting down system." Adam's system had detected the vulnerability and sealed it. The allies looked at them worriedly. He had been exposed. Adam had been warned. Now it was time to see how the man she had trusted, the perfect husband, would react when he was cornered. They knew this evidence would drive Adam crazy. The hospital room was no longer a place of rest, but a battlefield. Emily Vance was no longer the weak wife. She showed Adam the printout of the Uber Lyft log right in the hospital room. It was undeniable evidence of the secret destination on the Olympic Peninsula. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She was left with cold, pent-up anger. Adam Warren, faced with this evidence, didn't choose regret. He chose rage. His face was red with anger, but his voice was coldly controlled. It was the anger of a man who had been exposed. "You're haunted, Emily," Adam said, his voice sharp as ice. "You're putting yourself in legal jeopardy. Do you know what the hospital's lawyer will do to you? You'll be subjected to a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. Think about our child." Adam used the most powerful legal weapon in the United States to take away custody of a child. The threat of a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. He was using the medical system against her. Emily saw through this cruel manipulation. His words were not comfort, but a warning from an enemy. He had confirmed. Log Uber was real, Sienna was real, but he would use the law to declare Emily insane. Emily knew. This was the moment to stop. She left the hospital room, leaving Adam alone with his rising fear. As soon as Emily was out of sight, the hallway camera recorded Adam immediately pulling out his phone. He called someone, his face tense. "We have to move faster. They have footage. Prepare to move." Adam had confirmed everything. He was mastermind. Log Uber was real. Now, there was only one goal. Find the cabin before Adam could move the baby. The tension from the chase on the dark Olympic Peninsula freeways was still raw on Emily and Walter Hayes' faces. The black SUV was gone, but that direct threat, delivered via anonymous text message, showed that their enemy wasn't just Adam, but a sophisticated network of organizations that could track them from afar. They had irrefutable evidence, Adam's Uber Lyft logs and the empty crib, but they needed an inside witness, someone brave enough to break the silence that had enveloped St. Jude's Hospital. Walter, a former FBI agent, knew that in every organization, there were people with consciences. He bet on honesty and night shift fatigue. After several attempts at covert access, he finally received an anonymous call. It was Maria Sanchez, a night shift nurse in the neonatal intensive care unit. She couldn't stand the cover-up. The meeting took place briefly in the hospital's loading dock, where garbage trucks and delivery trucks came and went, a perfect blind spot from the main cameras. The air was cold, smelling of alcohol and diesel. Maria arrived, looking tired but her eyes full of determination. She spoke to Walter in a whisper, almost sobbing. She confirmed that her shift was unusually empty, and the industrial cart used to transport the baby was not registered for cleaning work. There were no janitors on that shift, sir, and there was a direct order from the board of directors. No one is allowed to talk about blackout for 10 minutes. The cover-up had been at the highest level. Emily, standing behind Walter, felt a warm wave of hope run through her. We're not alone. She almost wanted to hug Maria, but time did not permit it. Maria hurriedly handed Walter a small USB drive. This is the original log copy of the subsystem, she said. I copied it just before it locked the entire file. It will tell you who granted access and who ordered the deletion. It was irrefutable evidence to overthrow Adam. Just as Walter gripped the USB, the cold metal hospital speaker mounted on the wall turned on. The cold, emotionless voice of the operator echoed through the empty hallway. Maria Sanchez, please come to the administration office immediately. Personal matter. Maria's face paled. She knew she had been exposed. Nothing was random at St. Jude's. Adam's system had detected this leak. She backed away, not daring to look at the two. I have to go. If they ask, I won't give anything. Walter tried to call her back. Emily called her name desperately. But Maria had already rushed through the glass door, rushing toward the sacrifice. When Walter and Emily turned to look for her, her locker was empty. Her name was erased from the ward's schedule. She was gone. Maria Sanchez, their unlikely ally, was eliminated immediately. A glimmer of hope, then crushed by the system's ruthlessness. But the USB stick with the original log copy was still in Walter's possession. It was Adam's last lie that Maria helped them expose. Adam had been warned, and now the real legal battle began. After returning from Olympic Peninsula with evidence of the cabin, Walter and Emily knew they were being watched, but they needed to act. Walter bet on one last glimmer of hope, the integrity of an insider at St. Jude's. Through a secret channel, Maria Sanchez, a tired night nurse, agreed to meet them. The meeting was held briefly at the hospital's loading dock, where the smell of antiseptic alcohol and truck diesel fuel created a tense atmosphere. Maria arrived, looking tired but her eyes filled with fear. She didn't want to say much. She confirmed that the shift was empty, and that janitors weren't on the staff list. There were no janitors on that shift, Maria whispered. And there was a direct order from the board of directors. No one is allowed to talk about blackout for 10 minutes. The cover-up had occurred at the highest levels. Maria hurriedly handed Walter a small USB drive. This is a copy of the subsystem's original log, she said. I copied it right before it locked the entire file. It will tell you who granted access. It was irrefutable evidence to overthrow Adam. Just as Walter gripped the USB, the cold metal hospital speaker mounted on the wall turned on. The operator's emotionless voice echoed. Maria Sanchez, please come to the administration office immediately. Personal matter. Maria knew she had been exposed. She knew she had been betrayed. She backed away, not daring to look at the two. When Walter and Emily returned to look for Maria, her locker was empty. Her name was erased from the schedule. Nurse Maria, their only ally, had been eliminated immediately. The glimmer of hope had been extinguished by the system's ruthlessness, but the decisive USB was still in Walter's hands. Walter Hayes's fears became a bitter reality. Soon after Maria Sanchez was urgently summoned to St. Jude's Hospital, all attempts to contact her failed. Adam's system acted with ruthless speed, leaving no trace. Maria's disappearance was not just a coincidence, it was the clearest evidence that Adam was not alone. He was running a sophisticated cover-up network. Emily and Walter searched, but only found Maria's medical records closed. On a temporary computer screen in the administration office, a brief message appeared. Maria Sanchez medical records, status, terminated, reason, personal matters. This is how big corporations work. Extinguish the flame of truth with a simple click, turning the truth-teller into a name erased. Just as they were grappling with that feeling of helplessness, the legal blow came. A lawyer appeared, a middle-aged man in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, exuding the cold authority of Seattle finance. He was not a defense attorney, he was an enforcer of the corporation's will. The hospital is sorry, but if Emily continues to make baseless accusations, we will be forced to defend our reputation, the lawyer said, his voice professional and emotionless. He handed Emily a written warning. The lawyer warned her bluntly against countersuing Emily for defamation, and worse, he recommended a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. This was the ultimate gambit, using the law to strip her of her parental rights and sanity. Adam had won the legal battle temporarily. Emily felt like her world was collapsing. She was being pushed into a corner, alone against the system. She stared resentfully at the legal notice, trying to hold on to the last of her composure. As the lawyer turned to leave, Emily saw. In the far corner, outside the waiting room glass door, Adam Warren was talking privately with the lawyer himself. The eyes, the gestures, the intimate distance between them were not those of a normal client and lawyer. Adam no longer had the fake concern. Now there was cold, satisfied calculation. Adam Warren and the hospital legal system. They were not just allies, they were a team. The betrayal was no longer a momentary impulse but an organized crime, protected by money and power. Emily knew Maria's USB drive was the only weapon left to fight this ruthless husband and corporation. After evidence was destroyed and the hospital's lawyer threatened, Emily and Walter Hayes knew they couldn't rely on the system. They had to find the final link themselves. The true role of Sienna Blake, Adam's mistress, who disguised herself as a janitor to steal the baby. They had no choice but to hack into the old camera system of the Starbucks coffee shop located on the ground floor of St. Jude's Hospital where Adam often went. This coffee shop is a familiar symbol of modern American culture, where people work, date, but also where the truth is hidden. Through the old footage, Sienna Blake's image appeared. She didn't appear randomly. She sat in a hidden corner not once but many times, always looking at the clock, calculating the time Emily had to give birth. Her face showed tension, not of someone waiting, but of someone carrying out a plan. Sienna sat in Starbucks, not once but several times, calculating when Emily would give birth. Old social media posts revealed her delusions about replacing Emily. Her brazenness didn't stop at the hospital. Walter found evidence on social media. On Sienna's old Instagram account, a post from a few months ago was revealed. It was a photo of Adam and Sienna at a luxury hotel in downtown Seattle. Not just any hotel, but a high-end place like the Four Seasons. Under the photo, a caption full of fantasies about building a new family or future baby. Emily felt utterly disgusted. Adam hadn't just cheated, he'd promised Sienna a complete family life, including Emily's own child. This betrayal wasn't just infidelity, it was a vicious plot to strip her of her entire legacy. Just then, Emily's phone rang again, the anonymous text message sent just as they were looking at the evidence. "You never deserved to be a mother." The feeling of being watched turned cold. That text message, using Emily's own fears and doubts, proved that Adam had leaked every personal information, every psychological weakness of Emily to Sienna. Emily stared straight at the screen, her eyes burning. She realized Adam had shown Sienna her deepest fears, and Sienna was using them to attack her. Adam's betrayal had crossed the line of morality, turning into organized crime. built on the delusion of a lover and the ruthlessness of a predator. Emily knew this evidence was not only enough to convict Sienna, but also enough to convict Adam of complicity in a kidnapping plot. Walter Hayes doesn't trust emotions, he trusts numbers. After solidifying evidence of Sienna's surveillance and connection, Walter knows that to take down Adam Warren, they need to follow the money. His experience as a former FBI agent means he knows how to find the most hidden transactions. His target is Adam's bank statement, Wells Fargo Chase. After hours of intense work, Walter finds it. The payment is brazenly displayed. It's a payment for cabin rental Olympic N Forest. The payment date is just days before Emily's emergency cesarean section. Walter clutches the statement. He's planned this kidnapping all along. This isn't the spontaneous act of a manipulated husband. This is organized, calculated crime. Adam Warren, the hedge fund manager, used his own family's money to hide her child. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial, using shared assets to commit crimes. Emily looked at the statement, all her doubts gone, replaced by utter indignation. He used my money to steal my child. With this undeniable evidence, Walter knew it was time to take the case to the next level, beyond the hospital system and Adam. He called a former colleague at the FBI field office in Seattle, giving him a rundown of the kidnapping, the Uber log evidence, and the cabin transaction. However, just as Walter ended the call and prepared the legal paperwork, his phone rang. It was an official number. The call was from the FBI field office right here in Seattle. "We've received a complaint." The voice on the other end of the line was cold and professional. "Mr. Walter Hayes, we've received a complaint that you're illegally interfering with a sensitive investigation." Walter Hayes froze. Adam won the fight. He immediately used his network of lawyers and power to countersue Walter. He turned Walter from a seeker of justice into a suspect in the investigation. Their enemy was no longer a lone man, but a mastermind capable of striking back at them. Emily and Walter were not only fighting a kidnapper, but also facing the very system of law and investigation that was corrupted by money and power. They exposed Adam, but that meant they were put in even greater danger. Adam Warren's counterattack was ruthless and calculated. He not only sued Emily and Walter, but also used the media to manipulate public opinion. Adam, a successful hedge fund manager, cast himself as a grieving husband, worried about his unstable wife and her family's interference. The headlines ran brazenly across Seattle's local news channels. "Father of kidnapped baby accuses wife's family of interference." Adam stood before the camera, his face full of fake despair, saying that Emily, after a difficult cesarean section, had suffered severe postpartum depression and was haunted by baseless accusations. He also accused Walter Hayes, a retired FBI agent, of illegally hacking into the hospital system and trying to fabricate evidence. From the system's perspective, Emily and Walter were immediately turned into trouble. They were not truth seekers, but obstructionists and lunatics. Emily, exhausted from fighting her own memories, now had to fight the cruel judgment of the public. At that moment, the isolation reached its peak. 2 FBI agents appeared. They were not from the field office to help Walter, but to enforce the law. They knocked on Walter's door. In their hands were subpoenas. "Mr. Walter Hayes," one agent said coldly, "we have received a formal complaint from Adam Warren's attorney. You are being summoned to work on suspicion of obstructing a federal investigation." The subpoena was proof that Adam's money and power had temporarily prevailed. Adam had turned Walter from a hero into a potential criminal. Emily looked at the subpoena in her uncle's hand. Not only was she fighting to find her child, but she was also fighting to preserve the dignity and freedom of her only remaining family members. They had lost public support, lost the trust of the legal system, and were at risk of arrest. Emily was even facing a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. This was the ultimate danger. Emily Vance collapsed. She stopped crying. She was left empty and exhausted. The Seattle court was seriously considering Adam Warren's request for a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. Adam had won. He had used his money, power, and manipulation to drive Emily, a mother who had just lost her child, insane. Walter Hayes, a former FBI agent, now faced a disciplinary hearing for obstruction of justice, his reputation in jeopardy. They had lost everything. The public had turned against them. The law had turned against them. Physical evidence had been destroyed. Emily stared at the legal charges. She began to doubt herself. Maybe Adam was right. Maybe she had really been too stressed, too weak. "Am I really crazy?" she whispered, the question like a knife stabbing itself into her heart. "Did I hurt the baby? I can't remember anything." The baby was still missing. Adam was still free. The truth was buried under a layer of manipulation and power. It was the darkest moment, when hope seemed lost forever. At that moment, Emily's old MacBook lit up. A new email notification appeared on the familiar Gmail or Outlook interface. Email notification pop-up. The email was from an address she couldn't believe. Maria Sanchez. Maria, the nurse who had disappeared and been erased from the hospital system. The subject line was short and cold. Urgent. If I disappear. Emily and Walter both stared at the screen, breathless. They knew Maria had prepared for this moment. It was the dead man's switch, a secret defense mechanism that only activated when she was in danger. Emily shook as she opened the email. The content was even colder. "If anything happens to me, send this to the press." Attached was a Google Drive link. Walter, with his sharp investigator instincts, understood. Maria had not just copied the log. She had made a copy of the entire decisive evidence and sent it automatically. As long as her account was disabled, the email would be sent to someone she trusted. They were no longer isolated. Maria Sanchez, the brave ally who had disappeared, had left behind a weapon against the system. The decisive evidence, which could not be erased by Adam or his lawyers, was in their hands. It was the moment the battle moved from the hospital room to the front line of public justice. Adam could control the Seattle courthouse, control public opinion, but he could not control the internet and the sacrifice of a person who dared to speak the truth. Now it was time to reveal the truth to the media. After receiving the dead man's switch from Maria Sanchez, Emily Vance and Walter Hayes didn't send the evidence to the FBI. They knew Adam Warren's network had penetrated too deeply into the local system. They went straight to the Seattle Federal Courthouse, not to file a complaint, but to hold an emergency press conference right on the marble steps, in front of dozens of media cameras eager for a coup. Walter Hayes, the former FBI agent, stood next to Emily, no longer tired but deadly calm. Emily, though exhausted, held her posture, her eyes fixed on the crowd. "We have the evidence," Walter announced, his voice echoing in the cold Seattle morning air. "The evidence is not from a grieving mother's testimony, but from the hospital's own system logs, and it proves who the mastermind was." When the portable LED screen was turned on, the moment became an electric shock that shot through the entire courthouse. The grainy but undeniable black and white video played over and over again. Adam Warren, the heartbroken husband, standing in front of the NICU elevator. He looked around, then, in a moment that lasted less than a second, he handed his access card to Sienna Blake, who was disguised as a janitor. Exactly 10 minutes before the main camera blacked out, dozens of cameras and TV cameras went live. The whispers and screams of shock from reporters mingled with the typical Seattle drizzle. Emily closed her eyes. This was the truth she had fought to protect. The truth that had driven her to the brink of insanity. Adam Warren, who had been in the courthouse watching Walter's hearing, was ushered out immediately. His face, as he stepped out of the federal building's elegant oak doors, was instantly the target of hundreds of cameras. Adam's face froze in shock. His face turned from red to white, not from anger, but from the realization of his own demise. He saw the evidence on the screen. He saw thousands of eyes judging him. Walter Hayes pointed at the screen, his voice booming. "This is Mastermind, the man who took advantage of his wife's love, used the family's money to stage a kidnapping, and tried to keep his wife under insanity charges." Immediately, 2 FBI agents stepped forward. They didn't need to say much. Stainless steel handcuffs were fastened to Adam's wrists. "Adam Warren," one agent said, his voice cold. "You are under arrest for kidnapping and obstructing an investigation." The snap of handcuffs, a dry sound, reverberated through the chaos. Justice had exploded publicly and irrefutably, right there on the steps of the federal courthouse. The Seattle federal courtroom delivered its final verdict. Adam Warren and Sienna Blake, who had gamed the system, were sentenced to harsh sentences for kidnapping, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The sentence was not just punishment, but a public affirmation of the truth Emily had risked her life to defend. Emily Vance stood outside the courthouse doors, no longer a gaslighted wife or a mentally ill patient. She was a mother who had fought and won against a system backed by money and power. Justice had been served, thoroughly and unshakably. The moment she reunited with her son took place not in a cold hospital room, but in the Seattle morning sun, just outside St. Jude's Medical Center. Where the nightmare had begun now became a place of healing. Emily held her son close. The warmth of her baby, the familiar smell of colostrum and baby powder, was the most vivid physical evidence of her sanity. She took a deep breath, feeling her son's small, healthy heartbeat. Months of struggle, loneliness, and utter fear all melted away. At the same time, Adam Warren and Sienna Blake were led out of the courthouse. A close-up of Adam's face, no longer fake control, only collapse and regret. The handcuffs around his wrists were a final reminder of the consequences of greed and betrayal. Emily looked up at the nameplate of St. Jude's Medical Center. For the first time since that night, she looked up at it without feeling like she was about to lose another part of her soul. The hospital was no longer a symbol of manipulation, but the place where she had won the greatest battle of her life. Justice had been served, but Emily's story didn't end there. It was a lesson in rebirth. She didn't just win back her son, she won back her honor, her trust in her own intuition. Emily Vance's story is living proof for every mother, every woman who's been pushed to the wall. Never doubt your intuition. The strength of a mother, when pushed to the limit, is something no system or money can subdue. Emily smiled, hugging her son tightly. She fought with truth, with evidence, and with the sacrifice of those who stood up. Now she can live a peaceful life, built on truth and unconditional love.